What happens to a child when the home that should protect him carries the unresolved grief of an entire war? Henry Winkler grew up in a house that looked normal from the outside, but inside it was shaped by fear, loss, and memories his parents never talked about. His mother and father had escaped Nazi Germany before the war, but even after reaching America, the emotional damage stayed with them. They followed strict rules, kept the home extremely clean, and expected their son to behave perfectly. They had survived something terrible, and now they tried to control every detail of their new life. But in that tight control, there was not much softness or comfort. Their son lived in a silent apartment where mistakes were punished and feelings were often ignored. Henry grew up safe in body, but not safe in heart. In school, he faced problems he couldn't understand. He could not read like other children. Letters moved, words slipped away, and sentences refused to stay still. But nobody in the 1,950 seconds understood dyslexia. Teachers thought he wasn't trying hard enough. They assumed he was lazy, distracted, or disrespectful. Some even said he was stupid. They scolded him for not paying attention, even though he was trying with everything he had. Each school day made him more nervous. When report cards came home, he knew what would happen next. His father, shaped by the hardships of his own past, believed discipline was the only way to survive. He pushed Henry to achieve, but instead of encouragement, he used anger and harsh words. He often called Henry Dummhund, which means stupid dog in German. Hearing that again and again settled deep inside the boy, making him believe he would never be good enough. No matter how hard he tried, he felt like a disappointment. The world saw a child who didn't follow instructions, but inside, Henry was not defiant at all. He was drowning, confused, and scared. Because he didn't want others to see his pain, Henry learned to hide it. He used humor to protect himself. He smiled when he felt ashamed. He made jokes to avoid questions. When teachers yelled at him, he laughed nervously. When classmates teased him, he pretended it didn't matter. His charm started as a defense, not confidence. He wiped away tears before they could be seen. He held his fear inside because he didn't want to bring more trouble home. This habit of hiding his real feelings stayed with him for years. At 13, something unexpected happened. His bar mitzvah was coming, a moment when he would read Hebrew in front of family and community. But he couldn't read English, let alone Hebrew. Instead of giving up, he memorized every line. He practiced every night until each word lived in his mind like a song. When the day arrived, he stood in front of the crowd and spoke the words smoothly. People clapped. They smiled proudly. For the first time, he felt capable. He learned that he wasn't stupid. He simply learned differently. The moment gave him a small piece of confidence he had never felt before. It didn't fix everything, but it opened a small door of hope. A few years later, another moment changed his life. In 1959, he watched the movie West Side Story. Something in that film stirred something deep in him. The movement, the acting, the energy. It felt like freedom. He realized that acting made sense to him in a way reading never had. It was a form of expression that didn't require perfect spelling or fast reading. It allowed him to use emotion, imagination, and heart. That movie became the spark that pushed him toward a new dream. He wanted to perform. He wanted to communicate in the one way that didn't make him feel broken. But his family had different expectations. His father wanted him to join the family lumber business. Acting to him was a foolish idea. It was unstable, unreliable, and far away from the steady life he wanted for his son. Henry didn't fight loudly. He didn't argue or rebel openly. Instead, he held on quietly to the dream forming inside him. He practiced small scenes alone. He imagined a life where he could be someone other than the boy who always failed in class. It was a silent rebellion, but a powerful one. He wanted to be seen not as a problem, not as a disappointment, but as someone with real talent. All of these early experiences shaped him. The shame from school stayed with him. The harsh words of his father echoed in his mind. The feeling of never being enough pushed him to work harder than anyone else. His desire to be understood turned into deep empathy for others. His humor became his shield. His bar mitzvah taught him that he could succeed if he found the right method. And West Side Story showed him a world where he could finally breathe. These pieces formed the emotional foundation of his life. The struggle to be seen, the quiet defiance, the sense of inferiority, and the deep need to prove himself. These early wounds became the fuel for his future strength. He didn't know it yet, but everything he felt, fear, shame, confusion, would one day help him connect with millions of people. His childhood pain became the reason he understood kindness so deeply. But just as Henry began to build the courage to follow the one dream that made him feel alive, he had no idea that the world waiting for him outside his home would be even colder than the one he grew up in. How do you chase a dream when even reading the script feels like a battlefield? When Henry left home to study theater, he walked out with no support from his parents. His father believed acting was useless, a waste of time that would lead to failure. He refused to help with money, hoping Henry would give up and return to the family business. But Henry didn't return. He carried one suitcase, a few dollars, and a dream that felt too important to abandon. He knew the road ahead would be hard, but he didn't expect it to be this hard. He cleaned floors, washed dishes, and took any job he could find just to pay rent and buy food. Some nights he was so tired he could barely stand, but he still got up the next morning for class because acting felt like the only place where he wasn't broken. At Emerson College, he faced the same problem he had faced since childhood: dyslexia. Reading plays was almost impossible. Letters moved, words melted together, and scripts that other students read in one night took him days to memorize. But he learned to survive by listening. He recorded lines and played them again and again until they stuck in his mind like music. He listened for tone, rhythm, pauses, and emotion, building the lines piece by piece in his memory. This method was slow, exhausting, and frustrating, but it worked. And for the first time, Henry felt something close to confidence. When he performed, something changed inside him. The shame from his childhood didn't disappear, but it softened. He felt understood in a way he never had at home or in school. After graduating from Emerson, he was accepted into the Yale School of Drama, one of the most respected programs in the country. But Yale brought a whole new level of pressure. He was surrounded by students who could read scripts quickly, analyze scenes easily, and memorize lines overnight. They looked effortless. Henry, meanwhile, stayed up until dawn, whispering lines to himself, repeating them until they made sense. He often felt like he didn't belong. He struggled with stage directions because he couldn't read them clearly. He would hide his difficulty by asking classmates to walk through the scene together, pretending he just preferred learning through movement. Inside, he felt embarrassed and scared that someone would discover his secret. The winters in New Haven made things worse. His small dorm room was often freezing, and he had little money for proper heating. He practiced with his coat on, hands shaking from the cold and from the pressure he put on himself. While others seemed to glide through the program, Henry carried a heavy mix of fear and determination, but even in those long nights, he kept going. He learned that the students who looked confident were often struggling in their own ways, and when he performed on stage, even in small roles, people noticed something special about him. His acting had depth, emotion, and honesty. There were moments when he truly shined, moments when the audience leaned in because he made them feel something real. But after each performance, he went home with self-doubt because he knew how much harder everything was for him compared to everyone else. When he finally graduated in 1970, he hoped the world would open its doors. Instead, he stepped into silence. There were no job offers, no big opportunities, and no clear path forward. He was terrified. He moved back to New York and rented a tiny room with barely enough space for a bed. His money ran out quickly. He lived on cheap food, often eating the same thing for days. Auditions were everywhere, but so was rejection. He heard no more times than he could count. Some casting directors didn't even let him finish reading. Others said he was too short, too ethnic, too intense, or simply not right. Every rejection reminded him of his father's words from childhood, making him feel like he was failing again. Yet, he kept going. He auditioned for plays, commercials, student films, anything. Most of the time, he didn't get the part, but in 1 year, he booked 42 commercials. It sounds impressive, but it wasn't success in the way people imagine. It was survival. Each commercial paid just enough to cover rent and basic needs. He wasn't building fame. He was building groceries, one job at a time. These commercials trained him in front of the camera, but they also drained him emotionally. He wanted real acting, meaningful roles, something that touched people. Instead, he smiled for toothpaste, cereal, and soft drinks. It kept him alive, but not fulfilled. Acting continued to be both the place that saved him and the place that scared him. When he stood on a stage or in front of a camera, he felt whole. But the process of getting there, reading scripts, memorizing lines, attending auditions, was a daily reminder of his struggle. Some nights he lay awake wondering if he should give up, wondering if he had fooled himself into thinking he could make it. But something inside him refused to quit. He had survived strict parents, harsh teachers, and years of feeling invisible. He wasn't going to walk away now. He continued showing up to auditions even when his hope was almost gone. His charm, his kindness, and his natural emotional depth kept him moving forward when logic said to stop. He didn't know where his next opportunity would come from. He only knew he had to keep trying. And just when he stood on the edge of quitting forever, fate placed a worn leather jacket in his hands and destiny started to whisper. What if the role that gives you everything also becomes the cage that takes everything away? In 1973, Henry walked into an audition room with almost no expectations. He was tired, broke, and simply hoping for a small job that would help him pay rent. He put on a worn leather jacket, ran his hand through his hair, and tried a simple line. When he looked at the producers and said, "Hey," something clicked in the room. The people watching him went silent for a moment. They saw something in him that felt different, a mix of coolness and softness that fit the character perfectly. That single word opened a door he never expected. He got the role of Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli on a new show called Happy Days. At first, it was supposed to be a very small part, barely appearing in a few episodes. No one had any idea how big it would become, not even Henry. But even after choosing him, ABC executives were nervous. They worried that Fonzie looked like a troublemaker, someone who might send the wrong message to young viewers. They tried to limit his appearances and control how he looked on screen. At one point, they didn't even want him wearing a leather jacket unless he was standing near his motorcycle. They feared the jacket made him too dangerous. Still, every time Henry appeared, the audience responded. His character brought charm instead of fear, kindness instead of danger. Slowly, the rules around him began to loosen, because the viewers loved him more than anyone expected. By the second season, something unbelievable happened. Fonzie exploded into a cultural phenomenon. Children wore leather jackets, practiced his thumbs-up pose, and tried to copy his famous IE. He became one of the most recognizable faces on television around the world. Merchandise with his image sold millions. Lunchboxes, t-shirts, posters, and toys filled stores everywhere. Henry found himself on magazine covers and talk shows, and fans waited outside the studio hoping to see him. The success was overwhelming. On the outside, he was a superstar. But on the inside, he carried a different reality. His dyslexia never went away. The scripts for each episode were still a daily fight. Every week, He had to read and memorize new lines, and the fear of messing them up made him anxious. He hid his struggle from most people, trying to look confident even when he felt panicked. He would stay late on set reading aloud again and again, hoping the words would stay in his mind long enough for filming. There were days when his hands shook before scenes, not because of nerves, but because of exhaustion. Shooting days often lasted 14 hours. The lights were hot, the schedule was demanding, and the pressure to perform never stopped. The public saw a cool, confident guy who always knew what to say. But Henry often felt very alone. Fame came so fast that he barely had time to process it. He couldn't go to a restaurant without people staring. He couldn't walk down the street without being recognized. Everyone loved Fonzie, but few really knew Henry. He carried the weight of his childhood insecurities into adulthood, and success didn't erase them. In fact, sometimes it made them stronger. When the applause ended each day, the silence felt louder. Through all of this, one person on the show understood him deeply: Ron Howard, who played Richie Cunningham. Ron was calm, fair, and supportive. They built a genuine friendship based on respect. But their friendship faced a big test when ABC executives decided they wanted to rename the show Fonzie's Happy Days because Fonzie was so popular. Ron felt hurt. He had been the original center of the show. When Ron told the producers he would leave if they changed the title, Henry immediately supported him. Henry told them he didn't want the show named after him because the success belonged to the whole cast, not just one person. His loyalty kept the original title in place and protected the harmony on set. It showed his true character. He valued fairness over fame. As Henry's popularity grew, the power dynamics on set shifted. Some actors felt overshadowed, others worried their roles might shrink. Henry understood how it felt to be ignored or overlooked, so he tried to make everyone feel valued. He never took advantage of his fame. He didn't demand special treatment. Instead, he encouraged other actors, supported their scenes, and used his influence to help the entire cast, not just himself. He wanted success to feel shared. But even with all the goodwill, he sometimes felt trapped. Fonzie was a blessing because it gave him fame, money, and a career. But it also became a burden. He worried that people would only see him as the cool guy in a leather jacket and nothing more. His fear grew stronger every year. He wondered if he would ever be able to play another character or if he would be stuck as Fonzie forever. Even when he enjoyed the success, he felt pressure to maintain the image. He had to always look confident, always be funny, always deliver the same charm that fans expected. Inside, he battled the worry that he would disappear the moment the leather jacket came off. He loved the show and the character, but he feared the role would swallow the rest of his career and his identity. By the time Happy Days reached its peak, Henry was a household name, admired by millions. But he often went home exhausted, questioning who he really was beneath the fame. Acting still felt like a safe place in some ways, but it also felt like a job with heavy chains. The same role that lifted him to the top also limited the future he dreamed of. He smiled for fans and cameras, but the worry stayed with him. And Henry had no idea that the moment the cameras stopped rolling, the world he built would collapse faster than he could catch it. What does a man do when he becomes invisible overnight? When Happy Days ended in 1984, Henry thought new opportunities would come quickly. He had been one of the most famous actors in America. People recognized him everywhere, so he assumed Hollywood would welcome him with open arms. But that's not what happened. Instead, the phones went quiet. Casting directors stopped calling. Opportunities that he expected simply did not appear. It was as if the moment the show ended, his value disappeared. One day he was the beloved face of a hit series, and the next day he was unemployed with no idea what to do next. He went to auditions hoping for fresh starts, but most casting directors didn't even look past his old role. They didn't see Henry Winkler. They only saw Fonzie. They assumed he couldn't play anything else. Even when he tried to show them range and emotion, they shook their heads politely. Some even said the words directly. "We can't cast the Fonz as a different character." Henry felt trapped in the shadow of his own success. Fame, which once lifted him, now became the biggest wall blocking his future. As the rejections continued, his old fears came rushing back. The wounds from childhood reopened the feeling of not being enough, the memory of his father's harsh words, the panic he felt in school. Bills began to pile up because he no longer had a steady job. He had a wife and children depending on him, but his bank account was shrinking. He clipped coupons to save money on groceries and worried constantly about how long they could stay afloat. He tried to stay positive for his family, but inside, he was scared. Every day, he woke up wondering if his career was over. The silence from Hollywood felt heavier than any criticism. It wasn't just professional pain, it was personal. He had spent years building a career, only to find himself frozen by a character he had loved playing. His anxiety grew so strong that simple tasks felt difficult. He questioned his identity, his talent, and his future. There were moments when he sat alone in his home, feeling lost, wondering if the dream he had worked so hard for was slipping away forever. But Henry wasn't someone who gave up easily. He still had a spark inside him, a desire to create. Instead of waiting for Hollywood to change its mind, he decided to take control. He shifted from acting to directing and took a chance on something new. He directed a film called Memories of Me with Billy Crystal. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it reminded Henry who he was. It reminded him that he had skill, vision, and value. Directing allowed him to breathe again. It gave him back his sense of worth. It showed him he wasn't just the Fonz, he was an artist. Soon after, another unexpected opportunity arrived. He became a producer on the TV show MacGyver. This move changed everything. The show became a huge success worldwide. It proved that Henry had talent far beyond acting. He had a sharp eye for storytelling, pacing, and character. Being behind the camera helped him rebuild his confidence. It also helped others see he was more than a typecast actor. Producing gave him a new reputation, a smart, creative thinker who understood how to shape a show from the ground up. Slowly, piece by piece, Henry rebuilt his identity. He learned leadership by guiding teams, solving problems, and supporting others. He learned humility by starting again at an age when many actors retire. He learned patience by accepting that success might look different now. He learned that survival sometimes means changing paths, not because you failed, but because you grew. He stepped into rooms not as a famous actor, but as a hard-working professional determined to create good work. During this time, he also discovered how deeply he cared for helping others. He supported young actors, gave advice, shared his own struggles, and reminded them to believe in themselves. Many people saw him as a quiet source of strength. He didn't brag about his past or complain about his setbacks. He simply kept moving forward. He rebuilt his career with gentle persistence instead of loud demands. That humility gained him enormous respect in the industry. These 9 years of silence, fear, and rebuilding taught Henry an important lesson. What feels like the end might actually be a beginning. The moment everything seems to fall apart may be the moment something new is being created. Losing steady acting roles pushed him toward producing, directing, and mentoring. Being rejected forced him to reinvent himself. The career he once feared was over became a career he was finally proud of because he built it on his own terms. Day by day, Henry regained his balance. The panic softened. The silence no longer felt like a punishment. He found peace in knowing that his worth wasn't tied to a single role or a single show. He learned to trust himself again. And slowly, Hollywood began to notice him again, not as Fonzie, but as Henry Winkler. But just as Henry rebuilt his professional life, a force more powerful than any career setback was about to enter, and it would rewrite his heart forever. How do you stay strong for someone you love when you're terrified of losing them. Henry never expected to meet someone who would change his entire life, but that is what happened the day he walked into a clothing store in 1976. He went in looking for a jacket, nothing more. Behind the counter stood Stacy. She was calm, warm, and steady in a way that immediately reached him. She wasn't impressed by fame or charm. She simply spoke to him like a real person, and that was something Henry had always needed, but rarely received. Their connection grew naturally. Within weeks, they were spending more time together. And with Stacy came someone else who changed Henry's life, her young son. Henry didn't push himself into the boy's space. Instead, he showed up gently, step by step, until the child trusted him. Becoming a father figure to him was not a duty. It was something Henry wanted with his whole heart. As their relationship deepened, Henry realized he had found the kind of home he never had growing up. Stacy created a space filled with patience and understanding. Their home wasn't perfect, but it was built on kindness. Henry made a promise to himself that he would never make his children feel the fear and pressure he felt as a boy. He wanted a family where mistakes were allowed, conversations were open, and love didn't depend on achievements. When their children Zoe and Max were born, their home became louder, happier, and more alive than anything Henry had known as a child. He came back from long work days and went straight into bedtime stories, homework help, and family dinners. This was the life he wanted more than any fame. But life has a way of testing the things we hold closest. In the early 2000s, everything changed with one sentence spoken by a doctor: Stacy had cancer. The room felt like it froze around them. Henry's heart dropped, but he took her hand and promised they would fight together. He immediately stepped back from work. Scripts could wait. Fame could wait. Nothing mattered except her. He drove her to every treatment, sat beside her through chemotherapy, held her hand through the nausea and pain, and tried to bring comfort whenever he could. When her hair started falling out, he didn't want her to face it alone. He shaved his own head so she wouldn't feel different or alone. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was quiet, loving, and real. Those months were some of the hardest of his life. Henry often cried alone in the car after dropping her at the hospital, letting out fear he didn't want her to see. He watched her struggle through days that felt endless. But he stayed strong beside her because he knew she needed him to be steady. Every night, he helped her take small steps back to herself. They celebrated tiny victories, like getting out of bed, eating a meal, or sharing a small laugh. When she finally rang the hospital's victory bell, they both cried with relief. But their peace didn't last long. A few years later, the cancer came back, this time harder, more painful, and more frightening. They had already survived one war, and now they had to fight another. Henry didn't hesitate. He stayed by her side again, sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs and keeping notes of every medicine, every symptom, every change. He wrote encouraging messages and left them on the table beside her bed. Some were simple: "I love you, you're not alone," but they meant everything. The staff often saw him sitting with his head resting beside her hand, not sleeping, just staying close. He never let her face a moment alone. This second battle tested them in ways they didn't expect. Cancer doesn't only affect the body, it affects emotions, relationships, hopes, and fears. Some days, she was too tired to speak. Some days, Henry felt helpless. But their marriage changed during this time. It stopped being about routines and responsibilities. It became about survival, about holding each other steady, about seeing each other at the most vulnerable and choosing love again and again. When she entered remission the second time, they didn't celebrate with big parties or loud announcements. They simply sat together in their home, grateful to still have one another. Pain reshaped their marriage, but not in a negative way. It made their bond deeper. They knew now that real love wasn't about easy days. It was about staying when things became unbearable, holding on when fear tried to break them apart, and walking through darkness together. Henry often said that Stacy's strength taught him what true courage looked like. She had been a source of stability for him from the beginning, and now he became the same for her. Their marriage survived not because they were perfect people, but because they refused to let go of each other. Surviving 2 battles with cancer changed Henry's understanding of life. Fame, awards, success, none of that mattered as much anymore. What mattered was family, health, and the quiet moments of peace he shared with Stacy. He realized that his greatest accomplishment wasn't a role on television, it was the family he helped build, the love he protected, and the loyalty he showed when life threatened to take everything from him. The world saw Henry Winkler the actor, but at home, he was a husband who would do anything to keep the woman he loved alive. Their marriage became the real core of his legacy. It showed that kindness, patience, loyalty, and commitment could survive even the hardest storms. It showed that love is not about grand gestures, but about showing up every single day, especially on the days when it's hardest. Henry and Stacy's story became a quiet example of what true partnership looks like. But even as he held his family together, another storm, one he could not outrun, was waiting quietly in the shadows of memory. How do you forgive someone who never knew how to love you? Henry spent most of his life trying to understand his father, a man shaped by fear, loss, and the trauma of escaping Nazi Germany. Their relationship had always been complicated. His father demanded perfection and believed strict discipline was the only way to survive in a difficult world. Henry grew up feeling judged, pressured, and rarely understood. And even as an adult, some part of him still wished for a simple moment when his father would say, "I'm proud of you." That moment never came. Then one winter day in 1995, the phone rang. Henry learned that his father had passed away suddenly. There was no warning, no final words, no chance to say goodbye. The news hit him harder than he expected. Even though their relationship had been tense, the finality of death left him shaken. He flew to the funeral in a numb state, feeling as if he had stepped into a chapter he wasn't ready to read. At the cemetery, snow drifted quietly across the ground, soft and cold. His father's coffin was made of simple pine wood, the type his father would have respected for its strength and plainness. Henry touched the cold surface and felt a wave of emotions: sadness, regret, longing, and confusion. He realized how much of his life he had spent trying to win a kind of approval that never came. Standing there in the cold air, he whispered things he had never said out loud. He apologized for the distance between them. He thanked him for the strength he gave him, even if it came through difficult lessons. And he admitted that he had always wanted to feel seen. In that moment, Henry understood something important. His father hadn't been unkind for no reason. He simply never learned how to show love. He had carried his own pain, and that pain had been passed down without meaning to. The loss changed Henry. It pushed him to look at his father not just as the man who raised him, but as a broken human being with wounds of his own. That realization helped him begin the slow process of forgiveness. But before he could fully heal from that loss, he had to face another. His mother, who had always been strict, organized, and careful, began to lose herself to Alzheimer's. The woman who once kept every room spotless and every detail controlled now struggled to remember simple things. Henry visited her regularly at the care home, even as she forgot more and more of her life. Some days she didn't remember his name. Some days she looked at him with confusion, unsure if he was her son or a stranger. Those moments were painful, but he stayed patient. He held her hand, spoke softly, and tried to give her comfort even when she couldn't fully understand. To connect with her, Henry began reading Torah verses, the same ones he had memorized as a boy when he couldn't read the words. The rhythm and sound seemed to calm her. Sometimes she looked toward him with recognition, not of his face, but of his presence. He held on to those small signs, even as she slipped further away. Alzheimer's is cruel because it takes a person piece by piece, long before the body stops. Henry felt that slow loss deeply. He missed his mother even while she was still alive. When she finally took her last breath, he was beside her. He sat quietly, holding her hand, accepting that she had found peace. His grief was soft, not angry. He didn't think about the mistakes she made or the things she could not give. Instead, he remembered the ways she had loved him, even if she didn't always know how to show it. Losing both parents within a few years forced Henry to look at his past with a more forgiving heart. He realized that they had done the best they could with the pain and history they carried. Understanding that brought him relief instead of bitterness. Just as he was processing these losses, life brought him another blow. In 2016, Gary Marshall, the creator of Happy Days and the man Henry considered a second father, passed away. Gary had believed in him from the beginning. He gave him the role that changed his life. He encouraged him, guided him, and lifted him up during difficult times. Henry often said Gary was the first person in power who truly saw him. Losing Gary felt like losing a light in his life. The grief was different from losing a parent, but just as deep. It was losing someone who had shaped his soul, not through blood, but through kindness and opportunity. In his office, Henry began to keep 3 candles, one for his father, one for his mother, and one for Gary. He lit them whenever he needed grounding. The candles became symbols of where he came from, the love he gained, and the support that kept him going. They reminded him that loss doesn't erase the impact people have on our lives. Through these years of grief, Henry learned how to turn pain into gentleness. Instead of becoming angry or bitter, he became more patient, softer, and more understanding. He taught others what he had learned, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending the hurt never happened. It means accepting that people are human, shaped by their own struggles, and doing your best to let go. These experiences shaped the man he became in his later years. They helped him understand himself better. They taught him compassion. They taught him the value of letting go of old wounds so they don't control your future. But life wasn't done with Henry yet, because the next battle wouldn't be against memory or grief, but against his own body. What does it mean to grow old when the world still sees you as the boy who said, "Hey"? For Henry, aging brought both fear and acceptance. The first real sign came when he noticed something strange with his eyes. Words on the page started to blur, and faces in the distance didn't look as clear as before. After tests and long appointments, doctors told him he had macular degeneration. It meant his eyesight would slowly get worse over time. For someone who depended on reading scripts and connecting with people face to face, this was painful news. He tried to stay calm, but some days he felt a quiet sadness wash over him. He had already spent his childhood fighting to understand letters because of dyslexia, and now, in his later years, the world was starting to fade again. Along with his eyesight, his hands began to tremble more than they used to. Small tasks became harder. Signing autographs took extra effort. Sometimes he smiled through it and joked lightly, but inside he felt the shift in his identity. He wasn't the energetic actor running across a set anymore. His body moved slower, and he often had to pause before doing things that once felt easy. Instead of fighting the changes, he made the choice to meet them with acceptance. When fear tried to take over, he reminded himself that he had survived so much already: childhood struggles, career obstacles, and his wife's health battles. Aging, he decided, was not something to resent. It was something to respect. He chose gratitude over fear. He woke up each morning reminding himself of the good things in his life. His home in Brentwood became his safe place. It wasn't just a house, it was the center of his family's world. The yard was filled with olive trees that gave peaceful shade. A koi pond rested quietly under these trees, and Henry often spent time watching the fish move slowly through the water. It calmed him. It reminded him to take life at a softer pace. Sunday dinners brought everyone together. The laughter of his children and grandchildren filled the rooms. This simple routine meant more to him than any award or recognition. He also had a cabin near Lake Tahoe, where the family went during summers. The cabin was modest, warm, and surrounded by tall trees. When he stayed there, he took long walks outside, breathing clean air and enjoying moments of stillness. He watched his grandchildren run around, play games, and make memories. In these moments, he felt young again, in spirit, even if his body told a different story. These peaceful trips reminded him how valuable quiet time was and how much joy could be found in simple days. By this stage in his life, Henry had earned millions from acting, producing, writing books, and working behind the scenes. But he didn't treat his money as a trophy. He used it with purpose. He supported charities connected to reading struggles, knowing how much dyslexia had shaped his own life. He gave to cancer organizations because of what his family had gone through. He joined children's groups and donated books to schools. He often wrote letters to kids who struggled in school, telling them that learning differently didn't mean they were less intelligent. He reminded them that with patience and creativity, they could succeed too. These letters meant a lot to him. He wanted kids to feel the support he never had growing up. Even though he no longer chased awards, one moment stood out. In 2018, he won his second Emmy for his role on the show Barry. The first time he had been nominated was more than 40 years earlier. Finally winning made him feel seen in a new way. It wasn't about fame, it was about recognition for his growth as an artist. Standing on that stage, he felt grateful, not proud. He thanked his family, the cast, and everyone who believed in him when he doubted himself. That moment wasn't about proving anything. It was about closing an old wound he had carried since the days when he felt trapped by one character. Now, most of his joy comes from being Papa to his grandchildren. They don't care about the Fonz. They don't care about Hollywood. They just love him for who he is. They sit on his lap, show him drawings, ask him to read stories, and ask him questions about life. Their innocence brings him peace. Each Sunday, the whole family gathers for dinner. They talk about their week, share memories, and enjoy home-cooked meals. In these moments, Henry feels the weight of his childhood soften. He has built the family environment he once needed, a place of warmth, acceptance, and laughter. As he grew older, he thought more about what legacy really means. For many people, legacy means fame, money, or accomplishments. But for Henry, legacy became something simpler. It meant showing kindness to others. It meant being present for his family. It meant helping children understand they are capable, even when the world tells them otherwise. It meant choosing gentleness at times when bitterness would have been easier. His philosophy on kindness grew stronger with age. He believed kindness wasn't weakness, it was strength. It was something you chose again and again, especially on the hard days. He learned that people might forget your awards, but they never forget how you made them feel. Kindness became his quiet message to everyone he met. Even in interviews, he reminded people to stay gentle because life is hard enough already. Fame slowly became less important to him. Peace took its place. He didn't need applause anymore. He didn't need attention. He enjoyed mornings with coffee, evenings with family, and days filled with calm. After a lifetime of pressure, rejection, success, and struggle, he had finally found a soft space to rest in. He didn't run after roles. He accepted only the ones that felt meaningful. His life became slower, but also richer. And as the sun sets on Henry's long journey, one truth remains, a truth more powerful than fame, fortune, or even survival. What if the greatest role of your life isn't the one the world remembers, but the one you live in silence? At 80 years old, Henry has reached a point in life where he no longer measures his worth by how many people recognize him or how many projects he has completed. His days are slower, softer, and filled with simple routines that bring peace instead of pressure. He wakes up grateful for the morning light, for the sound of his grandchildren laughing in the yard, for the quiet moments he once didn't have time to notice. Growing older has shown him that life is not about being perfect or winning every battle. It's about staying open, staying gentle, and staying thankful even when the years bring challenges. He often reflects on everything he has lived through: the childhood that hurt him, the success that surprised him, the failures that humbled him, and the love that carried him. He knows now that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it's waking up after a difficult night and choosing to move forward anyway. Sometimes it's admitting you are scared but refusing to let the fear control you. And sometimes it's forgiving people who never knew how to give you what you needed. Henry learned resilience not through winning, but through surviving. He learned kindness not because the world was kind to him, but because he knew what it felt like to go without it. When he thinks of his parents, he no longer feels the old pain with the same sharpness. Time has softened the edges. He understands now that they carried wounds from a world that had nearly destroyed them. They raised him with the tools they had, even if those tools sometimes hurt. Instead of holding on to anger, he holds on to what he learned: to be patient, to break harmful patterns, and to build a new type of family where love feels safe. He knows he cannot change his past, but he can shape the future for his children and grandchildren. That itself is a form of healing. His work also looks different to him now. Acting brought him fame, but it also brought pressure. Producing and directing brought him respect. But none of those things compare to the feeling of reading letters from children who say his books helped them understand their own learning struggles. None of it compares to sitting at the dinner table surrounded by the people he loves most. The spotlight mattered once, but now, the light that matters is the one that fills his home in the evening, warm and quiet. At this stage of life, he sees success in the calm moments, not the loud ones. Love remains the strongest chapter of his story. His marriage to Stacy taught him what true partnership means. They survived illness, fear, and painful days, but their bond only grew stronger. Henry knows that love is not about avoiding storms. It is about holding hands through them. When he looks at Stacy now, he doesn't just see the woman he married. He sees the woman who fought for her life twice, who raised their children with patience, who stood beside him during his lowest seasons. Their love changed him more than fame ever could. Aging has given Henry a new kind of wisdom. He no longer tries to control everything. He accepts that some things arrive without warning and leave without explanation. He knows that life is not about staying young or staying popular. It is about staying true to who you are. He believes that kindness creates a ripple effect. A small act, a gentle word, a patient moment, these things last longer than applause. He hopes people will remember him not only for the Fonz, but for the way he tried to treat others with respect and care. In his quiet moments, he thinks about what truly matters, not the awards on the shelves or the scripts he memorized, but the people he helped, the lessons he shared, and the love he protected. He understands now that the world often celebrates the wrong things. What really matters is the life you build when the cameras are off, the choices you make when no one is watching, and the kindness you give without expecting anything in return. So, as Henry sits on his porch, listening to the breeze move through the trees and hearing the soft sounds of his family inside, he feels at peace. He has lived a long, complicated, meaningful life. He has been broken and repaired. He has been lost and found. And through it all, he remained gentle. The camera fades, but the lesson he leaves behind does not.